Pentateuch. First of all, we have the terminology. The Hebrew Bible is known as Tanakh. That means Torah, Nabim and Ketubim. Torah stands for law, instructions, teachings or prescription. Instruction we see in the Exodus chapter 18, 16 and 20, where God instructs his people. In Isaiah 1:10 we have hear the word of God. The instruction and teaching, it means Torah. There are cultic prescriptions like priestly way of performing rituals and worship. For example, in Leviticus chapter 11, 46 and 12:7, we have got the priestly way of performing rituals. Deuteronomy 1 verse 5 mentioned as law. The Septuagint, that means 70, Torah was translated into law from Hebrew to Greek translation. The New Testament is written only in Greek. Luke chapter 24 verse 44, Moses is seen as the prophet. Psalms are fulfilled. The Pentateuch, Penta means 5, and Tikos means tools or scrolls or book. Hebrew, it is known as Torah. Greek, it is known as Pentateuch. Though they are 5, yet considered one unit. The term Pentateuch was first used by Ptolemy, that is around in 180 AD. The Latin, it came to Pentateuchus Liber. The title of the books, Hebrew Bible, it is the first word of the book in the title of the book. That means the first word of the book is taken as the title. For example, in the book of Genesis, the first word is Bereshit. That means in the beginning, Genesis 1:1. For example, Exodus, you have 1:1 begins with names. That means Shemot. In English term, it is taken according to the dominant theme, like contact. The context of the book. The Exodus book, the context is the going out of the people. The Hexateuch, that means 6 books. Joshua is added. It is according to the concept of Von Rad. And Pentateuch, there are 5 books. That is another view. Number 1, A. Gerhard von Rad, he says that in the book of Joshua, the promise of God becomes complete. That means they enter the promised land. There are also other view, that is Tetratuch, that means 4 books. This is proposed according to Martin Note. He was a priest. He said that Genesis to Numbers form a complete unit because last book does not contain history. He thinks it was added later. The Samarian Pentateuch. They had separate temple in Mount Gerizim. They accepted only Torah, which was written in old Phoenician script. They claimed that there was the original one. It had 2000 differences. They said that their Pentateuch is as old as the kingdom of David because it was copied by Abishai, of the great grandson of Aaron, the brother of Moses. They changed many things. For example, Genesis chapter 50 verse 23. Pentateuch in relation to different context. Number 1, Pentateuch and Old Testament. Without Pentateuch, we can't understand the Old Testament. In other books, they give reference to Pentateuch, for example, Psalm 1 verse 2, Malachi chapter 3 verse 22, Pentateuch and Jesus in Matthew, and Pentateuch and Jews in Judaism. According to rabbinic literature, there are 613 commandments. 365 are negative and 248 are positive. Jews had the rituals of Torah reading. This was practiced before exile. Kings read the Torah. After the exile, Ezra introduced again, but reading it without king. So it was read by the congregation. The Muslims and Torah. Taurat was given to Moses, that means Musa. They are descendants of Ismail. Pentateuch and Christians. For Jesus, Pentateuch was Word of God. Several times he refers from Pentateuch. Luke chapter 24 verse 44. Jesus himself claims that whatever was written in Pentateuch, Psalms and prophecies are said about him. The death and resurrection of Jesus is fulfillment of the Old Testament. Ezra chapter 3 verse 2, the prophetic first book, and Psalm chapter 1 verse 2, the Ketubim first book writings. Worship. Traditionally, Moses is author of Pentateuch. There are four arguments say that Moses wrote Pentateuch. First, indication from Pentateuch. There are references from Pentateuch that says that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. For example, Exodus chapter 17 verse 14, Exodus chapter 24 verse 4, Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 9, and Deuteronomy 1:1. And Moses wrote down the law. Deuteronomy is written by Moses. Some parts of the Pentateuch written by Moses. Number 2. Old Testament, Ezra chapter 3 verse 2 and Joshua chapter 1 verse 7, 1 King chapter 2 verse 3. Number 3. New Testament, Matthew chapter 8 verse 4, Matthew chapter 12 verse 26. It is referred as Book of Moses. And number 4 is continuity in narration. The modern views on authorship of Pentateuch. Number 1. In 18th century, Moses was not the author, it is said. Number 1. Because of style of writing, the usage of vocabulary, the different theologians' concept. There are repetitions of concepts or events. For example, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, Genesis chapter 2 verse 3, Genesis chapter 2 verse 4 to 2 and 25. That means there are two creation narration. The Yahweh was not called but Adonai. They did not take the name Yahweh but Adonai. Number 2. The expression, the Lord spoke to Moses. This is the expression given in Exodus chapter 30 verse 22, chapter 33 verse 1, chapter 34 verse 1, Leviticus chapter 8 verse 1, Leviticus chapter 12 verse 1, and chapter 14 verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 4, chapter 34 verse 10. It was written much later, because it is said that there was no greater prophet like Moses. Number 3. Death of Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 5. The Philo and Josephus, the great historians who said that Moses was a great prophet, so he foresaw his death and wrote all these. The Talmud, that means collection of writings of Jews, has got two types. Mishnah, that means rule or law. Second, Gemara, that means Rabbi or teachers. It is a rabbinic writings. He says Moses wrote only till Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 4 and chapter 34 verse 5 to 12 of Deuteronomy was written by Joshua. Number 4. Major themes in Pentateuch. Basically there are stories and laws like pre-manual history 1 to 11 and patriarchal period number 12 to 50 Genesis, and liberation is from Exodus 1 to 18, and law at Sinai from chapter 19, and then number 10 till number 10, and journey from Sinai to Moab number 10, numbers 10 to 36, and 3 discourses of Moses in Deuteronomy 1 to 34. So these are the sequence of the Pentateuch. The linguistic and structural makers in Pentateuch from introduction to end. Genesis begins with creation and ends with the death of Jacob and Joseph speaks of the promised land. Then Exodus begins with the review of Joseph and ends with the Exodus chapter 34 to 38, that is the glory of Yahweh's tent, the tabernacle, the accompaniment. And then book of Leviticus starts with the Lord speaks to Moses and then ends with Leviticus chapter 26 verse 46 and Leviticus chapter 27 verse 34, where 2 conclusions are given. These are the ordinances, that is the ending statement. And then book of Numbers begins with the Lord speaks to Moses, and then it ends with the Numbers 36, that is these are the ordinances. Again the same sentences are repeated. Then the book of Deuteronomy begins with the Moses speaking to Israelites, and then it ends with the death of Moses. So this is the structure of the book of Deuteronomy, and all as a Pentateuch. Chapter 2. Literary problem in Pentateuch. There are 2 dominant texts found in the Pentateuch. They are legislative text, that means dealing with the law, and narrative text, that means narration of the events. First, command of the authority, that means needing more attention, but laws are having no discrepancies, that means one time said this book, next time that. It comes from God, so has more value. The case study, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, which is found in 2 places, Deuteronomy chapter 5 and Exodus chapter 20. The differences among them are that the Exodus directly law was given to people, but in Deuteronomy law was given to Moses face to face. They happened in the same place, but these 2 things happened in the same place and same incident. There are 2 differences. Deuteronomy chapter 5 has several additions, and Deuteronomy is the later text. Exodus chapter 28 to 11 verse, Deuteronomy chapter 5 12 to 15. The structure of the Decalogue. A. Exodus chapter 20 verse 2 to 12 are one part, that means positive and negative, while Exodus chapter 20 13 to 17 are the second part. There are only negative. That positive, when we say shall not, is the repeated thing, and emphasis is on the creation. The part 1, Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 6, this is speaks the brought you out. That means verse 15, brought you out, again it is mentioned. And verse 15 you have male and female. Whereas part 3, verse 21, male and female, again it is given. The first and last point are linked together. The focus is on slavery in Egypt and also focus is on Sabbath. The two things are Sabbath. The structure of the Decalogue in Deuteronomy is 5. Number 1 is matching with number 3 and 2 is matching with number 4. The Deuteronomy commandments are divided in 3 parts. Deuteronomy last 5 parts are bound together. Deuteronomy chapter 5, 6 to 11 is commandment concerning Yahweh, while chapter 5, 12 to 15 is the focus is on Sabbath, break day for workers. And verse 16 to 21 says about the social commandments. Number 3, second part of the Decalogue. It cause and reason for the commandments. Number 4, the cultic Decalogue, which is in Exodus chapter 34, 11 to 26. This got after having broken the first tablets. So this Decalogue is called cultic because it is dealing with liturgical calendar, most probably written by the priest. The narrative text, the prose version, it deals with two problems. First, double and triple version of the same event. For example, A, the double narrative of creation, that is in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 to 3. Then triple narration of which the portray the wife and sister, like Genesis chapter 12, 10 to 20, and same thing is mentioned in chapter 20, 1 to 18, and again same thing is mentioned in chapter 26, 1 to 11, that is about wife as sister of Abraham and Isaac. C, the double narrative of the episode of Meribah. This we find in two places, Exodus chapter 17, 1 to 7 we find. Also we find in Numbers chapter 20, 1 to 20. Second, the presence of doublets within a single narrative. For example, the account of the flood, which is found in Genesis 6 to 9, the beginning of the Joseph story, Genesis chapter 37, and see the crossing of the sea, Red Sea, in Exodus chapter 14, and exploration of the promised land in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. Chapter 3, formation of the book of Pentateuch and source. Number 1, history of research. From 16th century there was researches on Bible, questioned on the authorship of Moses. Number 1, Richard Simon from 1638 to 1712 is a French Catholic priest. He says that there are several repetitions, various resources. So God is named as Yahweh and Elohim. So he believes that Yahweh comes from J source and Elohim comes from E source. In 19th century they said that there is also P source, that means the priestly source. Then there is another person called De Witte who says that D source, just one more source, that is D source, that means Deuteronomic source, is separate from other four. So in 2 Kings chapter 22, 8 to 11, during the renovation of the temple, they found the book of law during the time of Josiah. The Deuteronomy written, and there is another person called Julius Well Hassan's contribution. He wrote a book called prolegomena to the history of Israelite. He proposed four sources. He said that there were 12 tribes and they had their own stories, which is transmitted orally. Orally transmitted the stories to new generations. They used to gather in particular place and there they recited and all learned by heart those things. Later some of them compiled together and wrote those things. The common things were told were the Egypt to Promised Land stories on the way God made covenant with them. Number 1, the origin of J source, that means Yahwistic source. Yahwist, that means J source, wrote in the south in the 10th century CBE, that means century before Common Era. During the time of David started writing. He also focused on the monarchy and Yahwist was a good narrator. The features of the Yahwist, that means J tradition. God is presented as a human being. The promise of Abraham fulfilled in Davidic kingdom. The most part of Genesis, Exodus, Numbers is written by him. He focused on good and evil, sin and forgiveness. Two sons focus. The second one is favored one, sin and forgiveness. Second is Elohist, that means E tradition, Elohim was referred for God. It is from the north, that means the 10 tribes of Israelites. God is called as Elohim. After the division of the kingdom during the time of Solomon, the northern kingdom felt the need of the document, so they wrote E source, the E document, which is called Elohim tradition. During 900 to 850 BCE, they wrote the Deuteronomic. The features of this book is they avoided Yahweh. They gave less importance to monarchy. They shifted from king to people, the importance to Israel as community. The community was rooted in covenant with God. The early true prophets they appeared in the north, that was Elijah and Elisha. The prophets emphasized on fear of God. The fear of God is not king. Fear God and not king. They had different picture of God. God is transcendent, not near to man. Emphasis on power of God, fear and obedience. God is father, not friend. Example, Genesis chapter 22. The obedience and sacrifice. Abraham was obedient to God and he sacrifices his son. It is like that. The silent features. They called God as Elohim. They were anti-monarchy. The dream accounts are added. The appearance of the angels are there. The moral sensitivity is there, like Genesis chapter 20. In 722, the fall of the northern kingdom and south kingdom fall down in 587. In 722, Assyrian attacked, so people escaped from south. They carried with them the document, the word of God, and they carried E source to the south. And south had already with them the J source. So they took place in their fusion took place. E and J source. Yahwistic and Elohistic tradition, the fusion was there. In 722 to 609 BC, the fusion took place between J and E tradition by the reductor. The reductor gave J as main framework and took some of the materials from E source and different from E. Number 3. The Deuteronomic document, the D source. The Decalogue from North, the Deuteronomy chapter 5. The bulk of legal tradition from North shaped into the book of Deuteronomy. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 12 to 26. 26 is the basic one. 2nd King chapter 22 verse 8 to 13. In 622 BCE, is believed that the book of law is Deuteronomy. It was hidden in the temple. The Hilkiah was a priest who found the book of law and gave it to King Josiah. The features of D tradition or D source. It was from North. It is independent source not attached to Genesis. Unique vocabularies are there. Long sermons of Moses are found. The covenant is more important than the king. The covenant modeled after the suzerain and vassal agreement. The suzerain was king who dominated the other king, and vassal was the defeated king. So the suzerain vassal treaty. The failure of the monarchy is the obey to the law refers to the name of Moses. They referred the authority of Moses by taking his name. It gives them hope for unity. For both of them, Moses is common. For both of them, Moses is common. The centralization of worship of Jerusalem during the time of Josiah. Number 4, the P source, the priestly source. This seems 550 to 450 BCE might have written during this time, and maybe in Babylon or after returning from exile. So Babylonian exile focused on family. The family became the identity. They were missing the temple and the rituals and the priest. So family and rituals, priest gave them new identity. Jerusalem, Manais, priest traced their origin to Aaron. Aaron was brother of Moses, the first priest, so they claim that they belong to the line of Aaron. To preserve the old tradition, to improvise new identity, that is family, or legal portion and rituals, the less narrative, the more of law, they had G, E and D source. Priest took only J and E and added the chronology. So mostly they added genealogy and chronology. The elements like Abraham lived these many years, so became more acceptable. They gave the years, they added genealogy, chronology they added. They added priestly concerns and rituals, result of their work, rich style of stories and laws. It helped people in their exile. In this way, their national identity was alive. The important features. A supplement of J and E uses both the names of Yahweh and Elohim. The importance to Sabbath and circumcision, that is their identity. Form becomes repetitive. The structure becomes solemn and rigid. The genealogy gave them hope. God will not leave me. The follow law for future generation emphasized on ritual, sacrifice, feast, priest, etc. The primacy of God's word from E source, the creation. The duality in 4 sources. Number 1, narrative, J and E. Who we are, where did we come from, expresses their worldview, their approach to life. The community life, the value system, etc. Second, the legislative, that means D and P source, speaks of how should we live, how should we act. The answer to these is found in D and P source. The formation of Pentateuch, according to Nehemiah chapter 8, 1-8, that speaks of the scribe, the Ezra. In around 400 BCE, Israelites were asked to bring Book of Moses, that is Pentateuch. This book is compiled of JEDP sources. There are 4 sources had different vocabulary, style, context. The different situations gave way for different sources, born out of different situations. J speaks about monarchy, E speaks of division of monarchy, D speaks of fall of north, and P origins from the fall of South Judah. So these were how they were origined. The criticism on document hypothesis. In 1938, the 2 scholars, Bolge and W. Rudolph, they say that when E and J is put together, they have no stand of their own. Many E materials are not coherent, and therefore E cannot stand independently. Number 3, in 1975 to 1977, a person called Van Sesters, he says that Abraham is the history and tradition. He evaluates the patriarchals, the period of Genesis from 12 to 25. The common element of exilic period, the Sabbath, is found in Genesis and after King. Number B, there is a person called Hinarkich Smid. He says that the so-called Jewist, he has written one book. The J source is also found outside the Pentateuch. They came from exile and post-exile. No conscious regarding the reduction of J. J looks like prophetic writings like Exodus chapter 3-4, written before 583, he says. Then we have got another person, Ralph Rendendorf, who says he does not believe in 4 sources. He says that stories existed in big blocks and one group came and compiled all this together. A group came, that is Deuteronomistic, known as Deuteronomistic movement. Deuteronomist is written as DTR and Deuteronomistic is written as DTRR, capital R, reductor. Deuteronomistic reductor, DTR and capital R. He says that Deuteronomistic book is the cause of Pentateuch. The historical books till King are the word of the documents. The provisional, the conclusion. There is no consensus, the consensus, the total agreement regarding the existence of the continuous narrative before the exile. For example, story of Joseph, like secular story or dramatic movie story, but its concept are ancestors. Second, there are many scholars gave the Penta a later period. The relation between legislative and narrative text are not clear. Number 4, but we need to be open to see the text independently of its origin and the intention of the author and read the text in the final form. Chapter 4, Ancient Literary Background of the Pentateuch. ANE, Ancient Near East or Ancient West Asia. Surrounding nations of East. The excavation in Egypt Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, and Syria, and found literature which are similar to the stories of Abraham and Noah. First, Gilgamesh epic, that is 2000 to 2100 to 17 BC. The earliest written text written on stone or clay, not stone. Gilgamesh, the king of Mesopotamia. The Enkidu, the created by God prostitute and sent to temple Gilgamesh, similar to the story of Adam, the flood narrative. Number 2, the legend of Sargon of Akkad, similar to the Moses story. S of A, founder of the Semitic dynasty in Babylon, lived in 2300 BCE. Number 3, the Code of Hammurabi, that is in 1750 BCE, an honor of tooth for teeth, similar to the 12 tablets and the Code of Hammurabi. The oldest rule or the code. For many kingdoms it was copied. 6th king of Babylonian dynasty. This code has 283 case law. For example, if it happens, what you can do. It is believed that biblical 10 commandments are influenced by that. The Hammurabi number 196, one who strikes father or mother or hand should be cut off, and it is written in the Bible that that person should be killed. Exodus chapter 21. The Hammurabi is a secular text. The Israelites have God and monarchy, religious law. The Hammurabi claims as law giver the royal proclamation. Israelites claims God as lawgiver. Number 4, the Hittite and the Assyrian treaty, the literature and the Deuteronomy. The early Hittite form, the preamble. Second, historical prologue. Third, demand on the vassal, how much has to pay. Fourth is list of witnesses. And fifth, causes and blessing. Chapter 5, the book of Genesis. 3 themes are there: to trace the human origin, to trace the origin of sin, and to know the ancestral history authors wrote. They write the book of Old Testament, the writer of the book of Old Testament. The traditional division. A, the premillennial history, that is Genesis chapter 1 to 11. The 2 creation accounts in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. The sin as the cause of suffering and death, Genesis chapter 3 1 to 4 and 4 chapter 16. And third, the Toledot, that means the genealogy. The first creation account came from priestly tradition or priestly source during or after exile. The Akkadian myth or Enuma Elish. There is an arrangement in the creation story, for example, light, and second you have dome, and third you have got earth and sea, and then you have got fourth day and night, seasons, day and year, and fifth you have flying things, and sixth you have creeping things. So there are 1 to 6 are there. So 1 to 3 is one part, and the second part is 4, 5, 6. So 1 is matching with fourth, 2 is matching with fifth, and third one is matching with sixth. That means 1 it is light, which is connected to day and night in the fourth. Second one is dome, that is separate from water, and fifth one flying things, the sky, the flying things, and third earth and sea. In the sixth number it is connected with the creeping things, bird animals, and 7 days of course God rested. Second, sin as the cause of suffering and death. An ontological narration. It is an ontological narration. The reality of sin is mentioned. It is existing. Comes from J source. The snake is villain, and snake is the image of evil. For conclusion, we can say that Jews believed that Yahweh created the world. God revealed himself to other nations like Gilgamesh. Then biblical narration is peaceful, not violence like that of other secular narrations. Then presentation of sinfulness by presenting snake. The faithfulness is accept the human beings. God punishes man but not abundance. Chapter 6, the Exodus. The historical background. Egypt, that is Pharaoh, the Hyksos, that means 1550, were overthrown. The new kingdom came and did not know Joseph. The Amarna letters mentioned about Hebrews in Egypt, and it is named the Amarna letters. There was persecution. This letter called Amarna mentions that there was persecution in Egypt. The historically Hebrews were in Egypt. The historians say that unnatural things did not happen. Hebrews believed that God led them. God reveals his name through Moses. Theme of Exodus. There is slavery, then there is liberation, then there is Exodus, then there is Mount Sinai, the important situation. Then you have got theophany, the God reveals himself. Then covenant at Sinai. Then there are commandments, and then we have got religious cults. Number 3, the composition of the book of Exodus. Number 1, it comes from J source, the Yahwist source, Exodus. The continues from Genesis, where it ended with the promised land of God was to be fulfilled, and the journey towards the promised land. There is promise is fulfilled, became a great people, and they had not yet reached the promised land, so that was still unfulfilled. Number 2, E source, the otherworldly tone. The covenant for them is to become holy nation. Exodus chapter 3:12. You shall worship God on this mountain. God of Exodus is in Sinai Mount because God dwelt there. Number 3, P source. They added to the ideology of Jerusalem priesthood. Priests had their root in Moses and Sinai covenant. To Noah, then to Abraham, and then to Moses. Number 4, the Deuteronomics, that means D source. Slavery in Egypt, liberation, Sinaitic covenant, and Decalogue. There they focused. Number 4, date of Exodus. It said that in 1450 to 1350 BCE, or the other option is that 13 to 1250 BCE. When you say 1400 to 1450 to 1350 is Amarna letter speaks of Apiru, that means Hebrews. In 1350, Hebrews were in Palestine. The time of persecution took place in 1450 in Egypt. The argument says that in 1300 to 1250 in Exodus 1:11 there was construction of Pithom and Ramesses. were started by Pharaoh and concluded by Ramesses II, who lived around 1310 to 1300. Number 5. Structure of Exodus, traditionally divided in 3 parts. Number 1. The departure from Egypt, that is Exodus chapter 1, 1 to 15, and then you have got second journey from Egypt to Sinai, that is Exodus chapter 15 to 18, and then you have got Israel at Sinai, covenant and law, that is in chapter 19 to 40. The covenant, then B is authorization of worship, third one is break of covenant and renewal, then you got D, instruction and construction of the sanctuary in chapter 35 40 to 40. Number 6. Important events from text. Number 1. Vocation of Moses, that's in chapter 3, we have got 7 to 12. The persecution of Pharaoh looked to jeopardize the promise of God to Abraham. God appeared to Moses in Exodus 3 and had experience of burning bush. God revealed himself as God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. Moses had already gone to the Mount Horeb, Sinai, before he took people there. You have got there reluctant, the convinced by, then God convinced him, then instability is there, and then God assures and accompanies, then identification of God, revelation, I am who I am. Then the people will not believe Moses is. Then he says threefold sign he can demonstrate of miracles. Then instability to speak, then God grants him Aaron. Then more Aaron helps in speaking. The plague narratives, chapter 17 verse 8 to you have got 11 verse 10. There are plagues that comes from the J source and later from E source, the 10 plagues, turning water into blood, frogs and etc. The theological discussions are that punishment inflicted upon Egyptians, some say that plague did not happen, it must have been written to increase faith in people for the cultic practices. Some say that it is not historical but legend. Some say some historical event in Egypt about plague. The recollected from the memory of the people. There were natural calamities in Egypt, not extraordinary event. The ancient people could not distinguish between natural calamities and supernatural calamities. But for Israelites it was from God. Law of nature was unknown to the people those days. People felt that God stood for them. The crossing of the Red Sea, what we find in Exodus 13 verse 17 to 14 verse 31. Moses carries the bones of Joseph according to what he had said, according to his final wish. Then in Septuagint, during the translation, might have been mistaken, because in the original Hebrew it is not Red Sea, but it is Reed Sea. So the strong west wind might have made dry, and the Egyptian might have gone crossed, and then the chariots got stuck in the mud, and so they could not have crossed. So it happened in the favor of the Hebrew. The different routes, they avoided Philistine kingdom. They were deep in the southern, that means Sinai. Then there was theophany, God revealed himself in chapter 19. Then appearance of God in Mount Sinai. Then Zion Mount may be rocky ground, small. Then where they did not stay or camped. Exodus chapter 19 3 to 7. People have to be prepared to meet God. The mount was holy, so people should be uh, people should be also holy. They should clean themselves, abstain from sex or washing of garments. God is in the image of thunder, fire, and light. Book of Leviticus, the title. The people gathered to Mount Sinai. They had tabernacle, and God dwelt amidst them. A holy nation, be holy, for I am holy. Chapter 19. The book does not tolerate sin, so priest has to make atonement for blood of animal. Blood is life, which is offered to God. Book promotes sacrifice of animal. The book of Leviticus, structure of the book. There are 4 parts. The type of sacrifice, Leviticus 1 to 7, and with a summary. The characteristics, concluding summary from chapter 7, verse 37 to 38. And the other sections do not have the introduction or conclusion. The inauguration of cult. The law concerning purity and impurity in Leviticus chapter 11 to 16. And then D, you have got holiness code, that is Leviticus chapter 17 to 26. You shall be holy, for I am holy. Yahweh your God is holy. Leviticus chapter 19 verse 2. Then we have got appendix. Then there are important themes like sacrifice, ordination of the priest, religious taboos on food. Then you have got sabbatical years and jubilee years. Then you have got expiation and atonement. You have got rules on sex. There are rules on marriage, and there are rules on justice. The types of sacrifice, offering either by individual and community. What does not belong to you can't offer. Burnt offering is also called Holocaust. It is also another term is Ola, that means chapter 1 3 to 17. The motive has to be pleasing to God, to thank God. B, the cereal offering, that means it is mentioned in chapter 2 1 to 16. The flour and oil with frankincense, unleavened bread, but with salt. The commemoration of Egypt experience is done by that. See, you have got peace offering. It is for fulfilling the vows, eaten by the donor or slaughtered in the courtyard. All these are voluntarily sacrifice. 2 types of compulsory sacrifice, that is sin offering, that is unintentional sins, and you have got guilt offering for the trespassing on the holy things, or false oath, or stealing. Only ram offering is allowed. A fatty is given to God. Rest for the priest. The restitution, he has to give back what he has stolen. Then you have got B, that is holiness code from Leviticus chapter 17 to 26, presented by priest. This is presented by priest. The fall of Judah leads them to exile and repentance to be holy. Holiness was expected from people. In Babylon they did not have temple, and so they started making temples, small temples, which was not liked by priests. So because they wanted one temple and one priesthood, so the Leviticus chapter 17 to 26, there are 6 speeches. 6 speeches are there, consecrated to God, place, seasons, things, people, related to ritual purity, intentional purity and unintentional, the external purity, the sexual purity, the land preservation for the cultivation, the priestly holiness code, that is Leviticus 21 1 to 24. Then you have got the book of Numbers, First you have got title, that is Bami Dabar, in the wilderness. That is the first word Hebrew. The Greek is arithomai, that means numbers or census or list of the 12 tribes. So the book begins with the census, the counting of the people. Second, you have got purpose. The people have become a new committee at Sinai. Book teaches them to obey the Lord and tell them about God's wrath due to disobedience. Teaches them to trust in the promises of the Lord, promise of God to reach promised land, to worship Yahweh alone. Third, the structure is like first they have got preparation to leave Sinai, the organization of the community, that is Numbers chapter 1 to chapter 10. It takes place in the wilderness around Sinai. It takes place in the Sinai or wilderness, therefore is known as Sinai precope, that means wilderness narrative. Ramesses, that means from Egypt to Sinai, the plains of Moab. From the Ramesses, Egypt, to the place of Moab. The themes like rebellion of the people and God, divine guidance. They organize the tribes around the tent. The charges are given to the Levites, Numbers chapter 2, 3 and 4, to serve the tent. The religious prescription, Numbers chapter 7 to 8, and indicate the preparation to leave Sinai. Then you have got the marching in the wilderness, that is from Numbers chapter 10 to 11 to 22, and there is revolt also. They starting from Sinai plains, Sinai to the plains of Moab. Events narrated especially at Kadesh, the Verenia. Some stories of Exodus are repeated, like Exodus chapter 15 to 18 is repeated. Teaches how to journey with the Lord. It teaches about disobedience of the people and Moses and Aaron, the punishment that is given for the community and the punishment for the individual. Like Aaron and Miriam is punished in number 12. Moses and Aaron is punished in chapter 20. Then you have got number 3, that is preparation for the conquest of Canaan. That is from chapter 22, 16 to 36. You have got they reached to the plains of Moab. In Numbers chapter 13 and 14, the serves as the warning. The experienced God accompaniment when they obey. The success as battles. The Numbers chapter 21 to 22, and number 21, 33, 35. Then number 4 is unity and theology of the book, is that this book looks apparently the collection of the stories, but unity can be found in the theological overview. God is faithful in spite of the lapses of the people. Part 1, the organization. The conqueror of the Canaanites, people doubt in the power of God. They question the authority of Moses. They refuse to march in chapter 12, 16 to 17, but God invites them to be holy in Numbers chapter 15, 40. Then there is punishment in Numbers 14, Moses and Aaron. All these themes hold the book together. So the source P is dominant here, the priestly source. The priest need was to separate Israelites from rest of the groups. It gives the identity, the priestly rituals, and important the mediation of the identity. There are also J and E source, that is in chapter 14 with it 13 to 19. The forgiveness and mercy is seen. Could be a different source, maybe. Number 5, the major themes are sons of Aaron and Levites. The Aaron, who was the elder brother of Moses, one who built the golden calf, image of Yahweh in Exodus chapter 32, 1 to 35. The golden calf was built for the forgiveness of sin. Aaron and his sons had to do several sacrifices. Leviticus 1 to 17. Aaron resumes his office in Leviticus 8 to 9. The name of sons of Moses are missing. Four sons of Aaron: Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. This Nadab and Abihu died because they offered the unholy fire to the Lord in the Leviticus chapter 10, I think. Then decrees of Levites, the Levites and the Aaron. Aaron was priest, but other Levites were not priests. They were doing ministry of serving at the tabernacle. They were like sacristan. Then the Levites had double functions. First, to assist the sons of Aaron, Numbers chapter 4, 1 to 3. And second, they took the place of the firstborn. Numbers chapter 3, 11 to 13. The firstborn, the ransomed by the Levites. The Canaanite rituals to sacrifice firstborn sons were there. Like Genesis chapter 12, Abraham. Genesis chapter 22, he goes to offer his own son. God saves the firstborn through Levites. So Levites took the place of the firstborns. Levites are consecrated. God saves the firstborn through Levites. So Levites take place of firstborn. Levites are consecrated to take place of the firstborn. For example, in Numbers 3 to 14, we have got the census, the counting of the people. For Levites, they count from first month around. For others, the counting is from the 20 years onwards. So Levites were around 22,000, whereas others were like 20,273. That means there were extra to other people, so they had to pay the 5 shekels. Later all they had to pay. It became the common practice afterwards to pay. Later on it will be Jesus' time, it will be like other things offering. The Nazarites, in Numbers 6, 1 to 27, we find that this Nazir means set apart or sacred or dedicated or vowed ones. Not the priest, but lay people, made holy for God through a vow. Vow was to be 2 types, for a limited time and for a lifetime. Number 1, limited period is for limited period of time, like Acts of the Apostles chapter 18 verse 18 we find, and also Acts chapter 21, 23 to 26 we find the limited period of vow. And then long for lifetime, that is Samson and Samuel, we find the scripture in Judges 13, 4 to 7, and John, the Luke 1:15. They should abstain from alcohol. Number 6 should not cut their hair or shaving. They should not touch dead bodies or even their parents. The remedy, if they touch dead body, then in unexpected case they have to shave their head and offer 2 turtle doves and start from beginning again. All they practiced was invalid from beginning. The termination, that is 6:13 to 21 Numbers, the shave the head and burn the hair. Number 3, the rebellion, manna and quails in Exodus chapter 16 and Numbers chapter 11. There are 2 types of rebellions. First, against misfortune, and they are punished by fire. Number 11, 1 to 3, and number 2, that is craving for meat, punishment by deadly plagues. Numbers 11:4-6 and 33. Hunger leads to complaint and regret over their redemption. So the major faith crisis is there. When they regret over the redemption, there is faith crisis. That means they don't trust in God. They want to go back to Egypt. So in this regret, Moses also joins the complaint. So God offers them bread, the manna, or the flesh, the quails in the desert. Insist on the 6th day rest, that Exodus chapter 16:5 and 22. Therefore God is for life and of Sabbath. Manna. Even today, insect which feeds on the trees, the secret bind of sweet, the sticky type, the substance. It was hard at night and melts during the day. The quails, the migrant birds. In wilderness, these birds fly in low on level and they are tired. They fall down. The water in Meribah, Exodus chapter 17, 1-7, and Numbers chapter 21-13. God asked Moses to command the rock, but Moses struck the rock. Reason is not in the Bible as to why Moses was angry. Then Moses failed to interpret the event as gift of God. The verse 10 says that his angry speech prevents God and the people that it is coming from God. Chapter 9, Deuteronomy. In the Hebrew, it means Devarim, that means plural, that means words. Dabar means word. The Greek is Deuteronomikon, that means norms or second law. The main content is in chapter 12-26, the laws, like Exodus chapter 20-22, we have covenant code up to 23:19. So it is the repetition, but an interpretation. It is not repetition, but as an interpretation. Exodus chapter 20 is word of God, but word in Deuteronomy is spoken by Moses. The style is hermeneutic, the preaching, long speech, the excellent oratory, aheb, to love, praise the Lord your God, used more than 300 times. The favorite vocabulary is covenant, Torah, ordinances, statutes, the inheritance, and the possessions. The purpose is, the legal idea is the highly developed and renewal of events called to return, the program for reformation. The context is that they are close to the promised land. Moses is old and they need a successor. Moses' farewell speech. The composition. The core theme of the Deuteronomy is found in chapter 12-26, what was found by Hilkiah during the time of Josiah. Comes from north. Formal in the temple. The found in the temple around 622 by Josiah died. The Deuteronomistic, that means editors, added 1-11 chapter, and the redacted during the time of exilic period. Deuteronomists wrote Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd King, and Deuteronomy. Martin North is founder of this theory. DTR, Deuteronomists. DTR refers for Deuteronomist. DEUT means Deuteronomy. DTR and capital R is Deuteronomistic. The theme of this book is centralization of worship, one nation, one religion, one place of worship. In order to avoid paganism, the promise of God, the promised land, and the concern for the poor. There should not be poor among you. The structure is review of the history is chapter 1 to and chapter 4 to 3. That is first address of Moses, an introduction to the history of Israel from Horeb to Moab. It has a historical perspective. The discourse on law, chapter 4 to chapter 11. The second address of Moses. That means first address is chapter 1 to 4, second address chapter 4 to 11. Number 3, Deuteronomic Law Code, that is chapter 12 to 26, the important one. It speaks about how life should be in the new land, how it should be. And the fourth one and the final speech of Moses is found in chapter 27 to 34. The speeches before death of Moses. On deathbed he gives them. Number 8, the important themes are the uniqueness of Yahweh and Israel. How God, that means Yahweh, differs from others. They are different from others. Trying to find out others' history, try to find out others' history and their God, what He is doing for them. Then you will realize that Yahweh has done for you. Deuteronomy chapter 4:32. God has revealed himself in fire and speech. Verse 36. He rescued them from the certitude. Verse 34. And therefore acknowledge that the Lord is good and He alone. Today it itself you acknowledge. Number 2, the centralization of worship that we find in chapter 12, 1 to 14. The beginning of code of speech of the e-tradition. The place is unknown. It must be Shechem in north, introduced by the original writer. It comes to south and discovered in the temple. To King Josiah interprets it as Jerusalem. The book says about the central place of Shechem in the north, but when Josiah found it, he thought that it was considered to be Jerusalem, and so he centralizes the religion. That is found in Deuteronomy chapter 12:5 and chapter 15:29 and chapter 16:6. In order to centralize the people at Jerusalem, they converted the local festival in pilgrim and festival in Jerusalem. As a result, the local Levites lost their jobs, so they need to amend the law. So they make the law not to neglect the Levites as long as they are in the place. Chapter 12:18. And slaughter of the animal anywhere. That's Leviticus chapter 17:3-8. And chapter 12:20. Eat meat wherever you desire, but sacrifice offering has to be brought to the sanctuary. Number 3, 3 pilgrimage festivals that we find in chapter 16, 1 to 17. The local festivals were converted into festivals. The Deuteronomistic code that is found in chapter 16, verse 2 to 16:11. The centralization of worship, the concern for the poor. These festivals were obligatory, the compulsory for the male. Chapter 16:16. The adopted from the Exodus chapter 23 verse 17. The first festival, the feast of Passover, that we find in chapter 16, 1 to 8. The two feasts were combined, like feast of Passover and feast of unleavened bread were combined. The Passover, originally it was the shepherds' celebration when they went from one place to the other place. Secondly, the feast of the unleavened bread we find in Numbers chapter 28, 16 to 25. It was feast of the farmers. It was the agrarian feast. Agrarian feast means agriculture. It was New Year, used everything new. new grain used for eating. So these two feasts were merged and called Passover in 639 to 609 BCE, associated with the event of Passover from Egypt and centralized in Jerusalem. Second, Feast of the Week, that means Shavuot, means Hebrew, means Pentecost in Greek, that means 50 days. Chapter 16, 9 to 12 we find. It is celebrated 7 weeks after the Passover. Greeks called it Pentecost because it falls after 50 days. That means 7 into 7, 49, and the 50th day they celebrate this Pentecost. The agricultural feast, that is grain harvest. This feast is attached to the commemoration of the receiving Torah on Mount Sinai. The rabbis attach this feast. The major concern of all this feast is the centralization of Jerusalem, the concern for the poor, and obedience. Third, Feast of the Booths. This is in Hebrew they call Sukkot, means tabernacle, Deuteronomy 16, 13 to 15. The annual feast of the consecrate at the end of the harvest of dates, olives, and grapes. They used to make